Hey guys, tonight, we slip beneath the dunes and the swirling sands beyond the glittering tales of great empires and into the heartbeat of trade itself, the silk routes forgotten markets of Central Asia. Not the famous caravanserais you always hear about, but the dusty alleys, the quiet stalls, the backdoor trades where fortunes rose and vanished without a single scroll recording them. And let me warn you right now, you probably won't survive this trip unless you've got a strong stomach for fermented mare's milk and a keen eye for counterfeit silk. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where my fellow travelers are tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step off the caravan trail and into the pulsing heart of a market long lost to memory. The dry wind carries whispers of unfamiliar tongues, Sogdian, Turkic, Persian, Chinese, and a dozen dialects no one bothers to catalog. The ground beneath your sandals crunches a strange mixture of wind-blown grit and flattened refuse, trampled by merchants' camels and barefoot children. Narrow alleys snake off in every direction, some disappearing behind tents patched together with every imaginable scrap of fabric, others framed by mud brick arches, barely wide enough for two men to pass. Unlike the grand bazaars of Samarkand or Kashgar that get all the tourist brochure love today, these markets are patchwork hubs, improvised, lively, and profoundly local. They exist not because some emperor built them, but because merchants needed to eat, to gossip, to trade, and sometimes to hide. You ease past a row of stalls offering dried apricots, salted fish, and cured lamb strips, the practical fuel of caravans crossing the Taklamakan, or Pamir. A grizzled vendor with sun-cracked skin holds up a piece of dried yogurt as though it's a treasure. His eyes sparkle beneath his dusty headscarf. Traveler, he calls. Good for your belly. Keeps the spirit strong. Historians still argue whether markets like these were officially sanctioned way stations or simply organic nodes that blossomed wherever traders converged. The truth, as usual, probably lies somewhere messier in between. In one corner, a man stirs a bubbling copper pot of fermented mare's milk, the air thick with its sharp, sour tang. Two camels parked beside him snort impatiently, as if offended by the very product of their own kind. You may want to politely decline that tasting offer. The stalls blend into each other with chaotic charm. One moment you're looking at bolts of indigo-dyed cloth, the next at wooden cages filled with squawking partridges, destined for someone's dinner or pet collection. You pass under makeshift awnings fluttering like prayer flags, shading merchants who sit cross-legged behind heaps of polished carnelian beads, amber amulets, and inevitably more silk than any one person could carry. Not all of it, of course, is genuine. But you'll learn that trick soon enough. Here, the air buzzes, not just with commerce, but with information. Travelers fresh off desert crossings trade stories for free while sipping hot tea from crude clay cups. A Sogdian merchant speaks in rapid-fire whispers to a veiled Persian woman, both glancing over their shoulders between sentences. You realize quickly that these forgotten markets aren't merely about goods, they're about connections. A place to trade not just silk and spices, but secrets, rumors, and sometimes dangerous news. In the distance, you spot a caravan slowly arriving through the north gate, its camels bowing under crates of unknown treasures. Children race ahead of them, hoping for a dropped coin or crumb. You can almost hear the relief of the traders they've made it across another stretch of brutal emptiness and into the relative safety of trade. One old man waves you closer. His stall, if you can call it that, consists of a low blanket with scattered oddities, bronze pins shaped like leaping horses, tiny glass beads from far-off India carved bone dice, and a curious coin stamped with both Chinese characters and Greek letters. You crouch beside him, intrigued. From many hands, he rasps many places. Historians still debate whether these forgotten crossroads should even be classified as part of the Silk Road proper, or whether they functioned more like satellite veins, side channels, feeding the great arteries of global trade. But standing here, you feel how essential they truly are. They are not grand, but they are alive. The sun drops lower, casting the tents and mud walls into long, soft shadows. A flute begins to play somewhere down the alley, its melody curling lazily through the warm air. A young boy runs past, carrying a basket of eggs stacked so precariously, you hold your breath until he vanishes around a corner. You've only just arrived, but you already sense how many layers these markets hide. Behind every brightly colored bolt of cloth or bowl of spices lies another world, a workshop, a temple, a back alley deal, a whispered secret. Tomorrow you'll venture deeper, leaving this open court behind, to find the true pulse of the silk route's forgotten oases, the watering holes that made these impossible journeys possible at all. You wake to the quiet rhythm of early morning in the oasis. Before the day's heat takes full control, traders and animals stir to life like clockwork. The faint jingling of camel bells hums beneath a chorus of murmured bargaining. And now you leave the bustling stalls behind, slipping deeper into the veins that fed these markets, the unsung oases of Central Asia. You trudge along a narrow dirt path that snakes away from the market, your sandals kicking up puffs of powdery dust. The air here carries a different scent, fresher somehow. Sweet reeds sway near glistening pools, where crystal water bubbles up from ancient underground aquifers. Without these, no caravan would dare cross the brutal emptiness that surrounds you. Historians still argue whether these oases were naturally occurring or heavily engineered by early settlers who dug deep wells and maintained intricate irrigation systems called kainuts, sloping underground tunnels that funneled water across vast distances without losing precious drops to evaporation. One thing is certain: without these watering holes, the silk routes wouldn't exist. These quiet pools aren't just pretty, they're survival. You pass date palms bending gracefully over the water, their leaves rustling like gossiping merchants. The dates themselves hang in fat golden clusters, nature's energy bars for passing caravans. You grab one, biting into its sticky sweetness, while a nearby herder watches with a grin. Good for walking, he chuckles. Clusters of low adobe buildings hug the water's edge. These are the caravanserais, humble but vital hubs where merchants rest, camels drink, and animals are fed before the next brutal stretch of emptiness. Inside one of these courtyard inns, you find traders sipping hot goat's milk tea, lounging on faded cushions, and swapping news. Some speak of distant warlords. Others trade gossip about rising tolls on the Persian frontier or an unusually productive silk harvest in China. The air here is cooler, shaded by woven reed canopies, but you sense the constant edge of tension. Every traveler carries news, but some carry it more carefully than others. A misplaced word can cost fortunes or lives. You glance toward a small walled garden where scribes sit cross-legged, copying documents and contracts onto scrolls and small wooden tablets. Trade isn't just goods, it's paperwork. Lists of spices, bolts, beads, and slaves, all recorded with painstaking detail to avoid disputes when caravans reach their next destination. In a corner, a veterinarian tends to a limping camel, checking its padded feet and carefully brushing dust from its nostrils. Camels are not only beasts of burden here, they're investments worth more than some traders' entire fortunes. A healthy camel means your silk survives the mountains. A sick one means ruin. Nearby, you spot another vital industry: salt merchants. They haul large crystalline blocks chipped from distant salt flats, essential for preserving meats and flavoring otherwise bland caravan rations. Salt, like silk, travels these routes as currency almost as valuable as coin. Historians still debate how many of these minor oasis towns were permanent settlements versus seasonal hubs that grew only during peak caravan months. Many were likely both shrinking and swelling like breathing lungs, depending on the pulse of trade. In smaller nooks, you spot workshops where leather workers soak hides in large clay vats filled with briny water and pungent herbs. The smell is well eye-watering, but the result is durable saddlebags and sturdy shoes, all vital for merchants constantly on the move. A leather worker offers you a freshly cured saddlebag, boasting good for 1,000 li of travel. That's roughly 300 miles, but you suspect it might go even farther, depending on how kind the mountains feel. The oases weren't just pit stops, they were cultural crossroads. Persian rug merchants, Indian jewelers, Arab spice traders, and Chinese silk dealers all brush shoulders here. Over time, languages blend, customs mix, and entirely new microcultures sprout up in these desert blooms. You eavesdrop as a Persian scholar debates astrology with a Buddhist monk over steaming cups of fermented goat milk. Their words tangle somewhere between philosophy and casual banter, a conversation you suspect might easily last several hours or days. At night, under a sky so clear it feels carved from obsidian, small fires flicker beside every tent. Storytellers trade myths older than any empire, while guards polish scimitars and check saddles for the long ride ahead. You sit beside one such fire, watching as a bearded elder spins a tale about a merchant who once traded a single flawless ruby for 100 camels, only to be robbed by mountain bandits days later. The moral, never trust luck that arrives too quickly. The air cools and you pull your cloak tighter. You realize that while historians often map the Silk Road in straight, elegant lines, the reality is far messier. These oases were not dots between points, they were lifelines, entire worlds unto themselves. Tomorrow, you'll return to the city proper, but this time you'll veer off the polished main roads of Samarkand and slip into its secret side streets, where the Silk Road's forgotten markets truly pulse with quiet energy. The morning sun filters through the soft haze as you wander back toward the city, its skyline rising like a mirage of domes and minarets against the pale desert sky. You've arrived in Samarkand, but tonight you won't be strolling through the grand plazas or the famous Registan Square that fill travel books. No, you're stepping into the hidden veins of the city, the secret side streets where the real markets hum quietly away from the official Silk Road spotlight. You duck under a low archway into a narrow alley that winds like a coiled ribbon between mud brick buildings. The main avenues may glow with blue tile mosaics and marble facades, but here the walls are plain weathered and alive with quiet energy. Children dart past you carrying small bundles wrapped in woven cloth. A donkey brays somewhere ahead as two elderly men argue over the price of something you can't quite see. There's no ceremony here, only business. Historians still argue whether these smaller trade routes through Samarkand's back alleys were officially controlled or simply tolerated as necessary informal economies. The reality is likely a mixture of both, where power shifts depending on who's watching and who's willing to look the other way. Here, unlike the polished diplomatic routes that hosted royal envoys and foreign emissaries, you find a marketplace designed for the city's working merchants, artisans, and local traders. They sell everything, and I do mean everything, that never makes it into the palace inventories. You stop at a modest stall where glass beads glint under the sunlight. The vendor nods, flipping a handful of tiny, perfectly rounded spheres through his fingers. They're not Chinese or Persian, but local imitations made in small kilns right here in Samarkand's back alleys. He grins, half joking. Good enough for distant wives who've never seen real Chinese glass. You get the distinct sense that more than a few long-distance trades rely on that logic. A few steps later, you're pulled in by the rich scent of roasting nuts and honey. A food vendor sells candied almonds rolled in sesame seeds wrapped in waxed paper to keep the sticky sweetness from attracting too many flies. He hands you one with a knowing wink. Cheaper than Persian dates, sweeter than a merchant's promises. Lining these tight lanes are workshops, invisible from the main roads, tiny, dim rooms where weavers, tanners, and potters work by lamplight. You peek inside one such room where a boy meticulously spins flax thread, his fingers moving like nimble birds across the loom's wooden frame. In another workshop, two brothers hammer copper sheets into shallow bowls, their mallets tapping out an almost hypnotic rhythm. The air smells of hot metal and wood smoke. No grand fountains or tiled courtyards here, just sweat skill and family craft. Historians still debate whether these side markets provided the bulk of Samarkand's internal economy or simply fed off the scraps of major Silk Road deals. But standing here surrounded by trade, humming in every corner, you realize these back streets may have moved more goods by volume than the showy main avenues ever did. You step carefully around a makeshift herbalist stall, where bundles of dried plants dangle from strings above jars of powders and mysterious pastes. The elderly woman running the stand doesn't even look up as she grinds dried saffron threads into fine dust with a stone pestle. One man leans in, whispering requests for something to help his dreams. Whether that means better sleep or something more mystical, you can only guess. The herbalist simply nods and hands over a tiny satchel tied with string. Down another narrow passage, you catch the unmistakable scent of leather tanning, sharp and sour. Animal hides hang on wooden frames drying under the sun, while craftsmen carefully trim and smooth the edges. These leathers won't become royal saddles, but sturdy boots, belts and bags for the very caravans still arriving daily. In one particularly cramped corner, a row of cages holds small birds, monkeys, and even a nervous-looking tortoise, exotic pets, likely captured or traded from distant lands, and now awaiting buyers with enough coin or curiosity to claim them. The atmosphere here is different from the Grand Silk Road narrative, you know. It's more personal, more improvisational, more human. Deals are struck in whispers and handshakes. Bartering replaces rigid pricing. Relationships matter as much as coin. You overhear two merchants negotiating fiercely over a shipment of indigo dye cakes, their hands gesturing wildly as they haggle over purity weight and transport risks. No guards, no scribes, just the raw language of trade spoken directly face to face. As you turn another corner, you spot a young girl sitting cross-legged in front of a small wooden box filled with cheap amulets, tiny carved eyes beads, and bone charms said to protect caravans from sandstorms, thieves, or jealous spirits. She smiles, offering you one carved from a pale horn. "For luck on your journey," she says softly. You take it unsure whether you believe in its power, but after witnessing these markets, you do believe in the power of the people who make them run. The sun lowers once again, casting these tight alleys in long shadows. The bustling slows, but only slightly. Night will bring new customers, different trades, and quieter deals under the cover of darkness. Tomorrow, you'll follow one of these merchants beyond his stall and into the vibrant, often bizarre world of the forgotten traders of dyes, herbs, and strange goods that made these silk route markets so fascinating and so easy to overlook. The early market haze hangs low as you follow one merchant away from his side street stall and deeper into the twisting arteries of Samarkand's forgotten trade world. Today you're trailing a breed of merchant often lost in Grand Silk Road tales, the dealers of dyes, herbs, and strange goods that don't always glitter, but fuel the beating heart of trade just the same. Your guide moves quickly, his short legs surprisingly nimble beneath flowing robes stained faintly with streaks of red and violet. Those aren't fashion statements, they're occupational hazards. He deals in color, and color here is gold. You duck into a shadowy courtyard where bundles of dried plants, powdered minerals, and chunks of resin lie arranged on low wooden platforms. A heavy, bittersweet aroma wraps around you like invisible fabric, part flowers, part earth part. Something faintly metallic. Historians still argue whether these markets specialized intentionally in odd niche products, or whether they simply filled the demand for every overlooked corner of caravan trade. But one thing's obvious, this forgotten world thrived on the bizarre and the specialized. The merchant points proudly to one pile. Bright madder root, dried and bundled like kindling. When ground and boiled, it produces a deep crimson dye used to color everything from royal robes to merchant flags fluttering atop caravans' arise. Next to it, fine threads of saffron glow like trapped sunlight. The merchant plucks a pinch between his fingers, waving it toward your nose with a grin. Worth more than gold if you're clever. The scent is rich honeyed, almost intoxicating. Not far off, you notice tightly sealed clay jars labeled with strange scrawls. Inside are indigo cakes, hardened discs of brilliant blue, produced from fermented plants. Indigo stains the fingertips of nearby workers who cut the cakes into portable trade-ready sizes easy for merchants to load onto their camels. Dye, you realize, isn't simply decoration here. It's status, power, and identity. The richer the color, the more distant the origin, the higher the price. You move on to another section where herbal traders arrange their wares in careful spirals of texture and color. Dried roots, coiled barks, and clusters of tiny flowers, each one offering some whispered promise of healing or protection. One elderly vendor offers you a tiny parchment scroll listing cures: scorpion sting powdered dried lizard, stomach ache crushed mint mixed with honey, sleeplessness burnt poppy sap boiled in milk. Historians still debate whether these remedies reflect genuine medical knowledge or simply generations of accumulated guesswork. But judging by the long line of customers, belief may be more valuable than certainty. You're drawn to a table where glass vials shimmer under slats of sun. A thin, sharp-nosed man gently rotates each bottle, showing off oils, and extracts rose myrrh, cedar, frankincense. Their scents dance through the air like invisible currency. These travel better than spices, he whispers. Light, fragrant, profitable. He explains how a small vial could cross thousands of miles, arriving as valuable as silk, but weighing barely more than a coin pouch. Beside him, a younger vendor offers something even stranger: snakeskins, powdered horns, and odd shells from distant coasts. Some will become talismans, others ground into questionable medicines or sold to curious nobles looking to impress their court guests. You spot a small group clustered around a trader displaying lapis lazuli, its deep blue veins glowing like frozen ocean waves. Mined far away in the mountains of Badakhshan, lapis is as much a diplomatic tool as a gemstone traded carefully, gifted strategically, and often used to decorate royal tombs or scribes' illuminated manuscripts. In the far corner, you catch sight of something more unsettling: opium bricks, tightly wrapped in waxed cloth. The merchant eyes you warily, offering no sales pitch. This trade flows through darker veins of the silk roots, tolerated in whispers, officially ignored, and quietly profitable. Historians still argue whether these lesser documented trades like opium aphrodisiacs and hallucinogens formed a major part of Silk Road economics or simply operated as constant side channels. Either way, their presence lingers like the faint trace of incense in the air. Everywhere you turn, you realize how much this trade depends on storytelling as much as product. One merchant boasts his resin was gathered from trees blessed by mountain spirits. Another swears his sleeping draught was gifted to him by an Indian yogi beneath a banyan tree. Truth bends easily when profit is involved. The bargaining here is quiet, but intense, not the loud haggling of main bazaars, but measured exchanges of nods, weight checks, and coded phrases. Trust matters, but so does bluffing. You hear phrases like, "The dye is young," "The root sings loudly," "This color will shame the sunrise." You recognize these poetic lines for what they are: salesmanship wrapped in poetry designed to cloud judgment and seduce buyers into paying just a little more than they should. As evening approaches, the courtyard fills with camels groaning under fresh loads of these strange goods, ready to move again through the desert arteries connecting distant kingdoms. The merchants sip tea, compare ledgers, and share whispered rumors about routes threatened by bandits or newly imposed tolls. Tomorrow you'll leave the dye stalls behind and slip into a whole different corner of these markets. The food stalls that feed not just merchants, but the caravans themselves, because every fortune traded on the silk routes had to pause now and then for a very human thing: dinner. The first light of morning filters through curling smoke as you follow your nose toward the heart of every market's most honest trade, the food stalls. Because no matter how many jewel silks or exotic herbs change hands, the traders, travelers, and porters all share one universal need: to eat. You wander into a wide-open square ringed by rough wooden carts, clay ovens, and wide copper pans. Here the silk roots smell less like exotic perfumes and more like sizzling lamb fat, roasting nuts, and bubbling stews thickened with barley. Historians still argue whether these food stalls served mostly locals or catered primarily to the endless parade of caravans. But the answer seems obvious. Everyone eats here. You stop at one cart where a toothless man stirs a steaming pot of sherpa, a hearty soup of mutton, onions, carrots, and rich fatty broth. His ladle moves like clockwork, scooping generous portions into simple wooden bowls for passing travelers who eat quickly before moving on. This keeps the feet walking, he chuckles, as though soup alone could carry you across hundreds of brutal desert miles. Nearby, young boys rotate skewers of kebabs over glowing coals, the smoke rich with spice, and the occasional snap of dripping fat igniting tiny flares. Each stick is dusted with ground cumin, coriander, and dried mint, a regional blend travelers swear tastes different at every oasis along the route. You notice a mother carefully flattening rounds of naan bread against the heated wall of a clay tandoor oven. The bread bubbles instantly, turning golden with crispy air pockets as she lifts each round out with long iron hooks. Warm, soft, and slightly smoky, the bread is wrapped in cloth and sold by the stack. But this isn't just dinner, it's preservation science on display. Much of what's cooked here is designed to last for weeks of caravan travel. You pass a stall where dried kurut balls, hardened yogurt rounds are stacked like pale marbles. They're impossibly sour, require no refrigeration, and dissolve into warm water to create an instant soup. Next to them, piles of dried apricots and dates glisten like amber under the sun, offering concentrated bursts of sugar and nutrients for riders who won't see fresh fruit again for weeks. One trader offers thin strips of jerked lamb, dried with salt and spices until they snap crisply in your fingers. He grins and explains. This piece saw both mountains and desert, and still tastes good. Historians still debate whether certain recipes like preserved lamb or salted fish from distant lakes were carried into Central Asia by Persian or Turkic traders. But what's clear is that culinary techniques flowed along these routes as freely as silk or gemstones. You can hear the melodic clang of a small vendor's tea kettle stacked neatly on open fires. Boiling tea infused with local herbs fills simple porcelain cups. Some customers sip it straight. Others dissolve sugar cubes between their teeth for a sweeter rush. A few stalls offer more curious local specialties. Fermented mare's milk kumis, sour, fizzy, slightly alcoholic. Roasted camel hump fat, buttery and rich, prized for special occasions. Spiced goat sausages, heavily salted and dried for transport. You carefully sidestep one bubbling pot containing something that strongly resembles boiled sheep's head. The cook stirs it casually, unbothered by your raised eyebrow. For strength, he says with a wink. You politely pretend you've suddenly lost your appetite. More than once, merchants warn you never trust unfamiliar water. Instead, many prefer watered wine, fermented drinks, or tea, safer and stomach-friendly on long journeys where illness can cripple entire caravans. In one corner, you stumble upon a bustling row of spice sellers blending food with medicine. Ground ginger, cloves, anise, and dried chili peppers all double as flavor and protection against indigestion, infection, or simple exhaustion. The line between chef and healer blurs here easily. Children dart between the stalls, their mouths sticky with honeyed baklava-like pastries made from thin sheets of dough, chopped nuts, and heavy syrup. Even travelers loaded with serious cargo can't resist these fleeting indulgences before heading back into the sand. Historians still debate whether certain dessert recipes traveled east from Persia or west from India. You suspect they simply followed the people who, no matter where they came from, always found time for something sweet. As dusk rolls in, the food stalls transform. The smells grow smokier, the conversations looser, and laughter swells beneath the first stars. Travelers gather not just to eat, but to exchange information: who's encountered bandits, which mountain passes remain clear where toll collectors have grown greedy. Around one fire, you hear stories of Mongol warlords enforcing strict but fair taxes. Around another, rumors spread of Chinese silk shipments delayed by floods. Information flows as freely as broth in these markets, a different kind of currency entirely. Tomorrow, you'll step behind these stalls into the humble workshops that quietly feed the market's supply chains, the weavers and leather workers whose silent hands create the goods every trader wants, but few ever see being made. The morning hums softly as you slip away from the smoky food stalls, ducking once again into Samarkand's winding veins. But now, you move past the polished sales pitches and into the quiet heart of production, the hidden workshops of weavers and leather workers, whose steady hands keep these markets alive, one thread and one hide at a time. You squeeze through a narrow lane, almost having to turn sideways as the walls seem to lean in around you. The main bazaar is all noise, but here behind these mud brick doors, it's mostly the sound of rhythm looms, creaking hammers, tapping knives slicing through leather. Historians still debate whether these workshops operated independently or under guild-like systems that controlled prices and quality. Either way, once you're here, it's clear these craftspeople form a tight ecosystem that quietly feeds the market's endless hunger for goods. You step into one weaving courtyard where men and women sit cross-legged on low stools, their fingers flying across wooden looms strung with narrow threads of flax, cotton, and silk blends. The looms creak like old wooden ships as colored threads cross back and forth. Every few strokes, the weaver pauses, gently tapping down the weft with a narrow comb, ensuring the fabric remains tight, even, and durable. Beside them, apprentices boil plant roots and barks in wide clay pots, mixing natural dyes into vibrant purples, indigos, saffron yellows, and deep crimsons. These colors will soak into the threads before they're dried, stretched, and eventually woven into tunics, robes, headscarves, and wall hangings. One weaver laughs softly, holding up a cloth shimmering faintly in the early light, good enough to fool any distant prince who's never touched Chinese silk. And indeed, you realize how much of what flows through these markets isn't silk at all, but imitation silk masterfully woven to imitate the luster and softness of the precious Chinese product. Historians still argue whether these Central Asian weavers reverse-engineered silk techniques or simply invented their own clever approximations. What's certain is that many traders down the line often had little clue whether they were buying real silk or something almost as good. In one corner, a team works on more practical goods, thick woolen cloaks and felted saddle blankets destined for mountain traders who value warmth over luxury. The air smells faintly of wet wool and heated iron used to press the fabric flat. Just beyond the weavers, you find another layer of market life. The leather workers, their tools gleaming dully in the filtered sunlight. They sit hunched over wide animal hides, camel goat, and occasionally even horse trimming, smoothing and stitching with quiet focus. One man scores long straps that will soon become harnesses and reins for caravan camels. Another carefully shapes sturdy leather sandals with upturned toes, perfect for walking long distances across desert sands. You pause beside a younger apprentice dipping a hide into a vat of tannin-rich water darkened by soaked oak bark and sumac leaves. The mixture smells sharp and earthy, strong enough to sting your eyes slightly. The master leather worker chuckles at your reaction. Better the eyes sting now than the feet bleed later. You can't argue with that logic. Not far from the tanning yard, finished goods hang drying under shaded cloth bags, belts, scabbards, and padded helmets. Some carry simple stamped patterns, geometric shapes, swirling waves, or tiny flowers adding a touch of beauty to their functional designs. Historians still debate whether these stamped designs were purely decorative, or sometimes carried hidden meanings, family marks, protective symbols, or quiet signatures from proud artisans. In yet another courtyard, you glimpse the bookbinders quietly stitching folded parchment between tough leather covers. Their works will soon carry Buddhist sutras, Persian poetry, legal contracts, and merchant ledgers across vast distances. Every binding, every seam holds stories destined for cities the artisans themselves may never see. Occasionally, scraps from these workshops find second lives. Children play with odd-sized leather offcuts, turning them into makeshift balls or doll clothing. Even cast-off thread is gathered to patch garments, nothing wasted in these tight economies. You listen to the soft cadence of quiet voices, exchanging simple gossip. The northern road floods again. A new tax on the Zetisu Pass. 2 camels stolen near the mountain shrine. While traders argue and haggle in the open squares, these artisans quietly feed the entire machine from behind the curtain, the unseen gears of the Silk Road engine. As the day lengthens, you notice bundles of finished goods, loaded into reed baskets, carefully wrapped in waxed cloth to protect them from dust, moisture, and thieving hands. Porters hoist them onto donkeys and carts, ready for the short journey back to the bustling front stalls where merchants will sell them at triple the workshop price. The artisans seem unbothered by this profit gap. Their pride lies in their craft, not in the coin that follows. As one elder weaver shrugs, "We build the river, others ride the current." As the sun drops low again, you realize how layered this forgotten market truly is, how much labor skill and quiet brilliance lies behind every flashy silk route sale. Tomorrow, you'll step into an even murkier corner beyond legal goods, entirely into the shadowy world of spice brokers, smugglers, and the quiet underbelly that thrives wherever fortunes change hands. The light shifts as you step deeper into the undercurrent that hums beneath these markets. The stalls behind you sell fragrant spices and glittering silk, but here in the narrow, half-shaded back courtyards, you enter the world of spice brokers and smugglers, the silk route's slippery middlemen, who blur the line between legal trade and whispered deals. You move quietly past a weathered wooden door barely ajar. The air changes almost immediately, heavier, richer. The scent isn't a simple mixture of food or incense. It's concentrated commerce. Pepper, cinnamon, cardamom, saffron, turmeric layers of warm, earthy, and pungent aromas fold over one another like heavy silk wraps. In front of you, stacks of small, wax-sealed jars and tightly bound sacks sit against the wall, each marked with cryptic symbols rather than names. A man with a sharp beard and sharper eyes gestures you inside. Historians still argue whether these spice brokers operated fully above board, or if many doubled as discreet handlers of smuggled goods. But as your host leads you further into the dim room, it's clear this isn't the open bazaar. This is where sensitive trades occur. He opens one cloth-wrapped bundle, revealing tiny grains of paradise seeds from far-off African coasts, used both for cooking and as curious medicine. Next to it, sealed ivory tubes hold true cinnamon bark, its value rivaling silver in many markets further west. The broker smiles. Good for the emperor's kitchen, or for bribes. You're not entirely sure whether he's joking. At another table, weighed carefully on small brass scales, lies nutmeg from the Spice Islands. A single handful represents months of travel and fortunes wagered across seas and deserts. Dangerous cargo, another merchant whispers. Not for the taxmen to see. Historians still debate how heavily taxation and tolls influence the rise of these backroom brokers. But wherever there are taxes, there are smugglers. And here, spice moves quietly in double-wrapped sacks, hidden beneath legal fabrics or disguised among cheaper goods. You glance at a porter sealing small glass vials into hollowed-out scroll cases. One extra kick to a camel's side on a lonely trail could easily spill a fortune's worth of illicit spice into the sand. Beside the brokers, you spot another table. This one lined with dried medicinal herbs, far more obscure than the ones you saw in the main markets. Thin roots, labeled with faded ink, asafoetida resin to settle nervous stomachs, Szechuan pepper husks for toothaches, dried betel leaves for ceremonial chewing. You watch as a broker carefully wraps packets into waxed cloth, handing them discreetly to a traveling doctor with a heavy pouch of mixed coins. No receipts, no questions. In one smoky alcove, 2 men lean over a small map drawn on leather tracing possible routes around the official customs stations. One taps his finger on a narrow pass skirting a notorious toll collection point. Fewer guards here after the spring floods, he murmurs. More risk of bandits, but fewer bribes. Historians still argue whether smugglers operated as loosely coordinated networks or independent risk-takers. But watching these quiet negotiations, you sense both opportunists cooperating when necessary, competing when they must. Not all of it is illegal, of course. Much is simply quiet business goods arriving earlier than official records show or leaving before tax collectors arrive. Spices that bypass inspection arrive fresher and sell for more. Time here is profit. A thin young courier darts past you, balancing a sealed amphora, sloshing gently as he weaves between men. Olive oil, you're told. But a knowing smirk suggests it may hide something far more valuable. You follow him briefly to a nearby side door where a caravan waits in near silence, camels already loaded handlers exchanging brief nods rather than lengthy farewells. These night runs aren't designed for visibility. They'll disappear into the desert well before sunrise. Beyond the spices and oils, you catch snippets of conversations about even more unofficial trades. Rare dyes banned by certain courts, forbidden religious manuscripts, rare bird feathers, and occasionally the softest whispers of human trafficking. Not everything here smells of cinnamon. You feel the weight of this place. It's not loud like the bustling bazaar, but heavier like walking through thick, perfumed fog. Money moves fast here. Reputations even faster. One old broker leans in as you pass, his voice barely above a whisper. Everyone watches the silk caravans. They never see the real treasure carried in their shadows. You step back into the open alleyways as evening falls again, your head spinning slightly from the cocktail of scents, secrets, and side deals. Tomorrow you'll enter a brighter corner of this hidden world, the performers, poets, and storytellers who turn every stop along the silk routes into both a market and a traveling theater of humanity. The sun rises lazily over the city's rooftops, casting long stripes of light between tightly packed buildings as you turn away from the shadowy spice brokers and drift towards something lighter, the entertainers, poets, and storytellers who fill these forgotten markets with laughter music and the irresistible hum of human drama. Because wherever traders gather, where money changes hands and tensions simmer, people need relief. And so the performers arrive, their talents as portable and valuable as any merchant's cargo. You follow the faint pluck of a rebab, a stringed instrument humming like a distant bird. The narrow street opens into a small courtyard filled with travelers sitting cross-legged on worn rugs, sipping tea, as a young musician draws his bow across the strings. His notes rise and fall in a gentle, hypnotic rhythm that seems to wrap the entire space in silk. Historians still argue whether these performers were officially sanctioned guild members or wandering freelancers who followed the caravans opportunistically. But standing here watching them work, it's clear they are as vital as any trader. You settle beside a group of merchants, their faces slack with weariness, their eyes alive with amusement. The music fades, and a storyteller steps forward, his robe swirling like stage curtains. Once he begins, there was a foolish merchant who tried to sell fake saffron to a Mongol Khan. The audience chuckles. They know how this one ends. These tales are part humor, part cautionary business school, and part veiled gossip about real men who probably still walk these streets. His voice rises and falls, sometimes pausing just long enough for the next teacup to be refilled. You realize this isn't just performance. It's a kind of social glue binding people together in laughter over their shared hopes and failures. You move on, drawn by a new sound, juggling clubs clacking mid-air. In another corner, a pair of young performers toss brightly painted wooden clubs between them, adding increasingly absurd flourishes as the crowd's laughter builds. A child giggles loudly as one juggler balances a bowl of steaming tea on his head without spilling a drop. Behind them, a thin man with a trained monkey leads his tiny performer through comical bows and exaggerated dances, earning scattered coins tossed from amused merchants and travelers. But not every act is purely light-hearted. You soon encounter a fortune teller seated cross-legged behind a low table draped with silk. Small metal tokens, glass beads, and scraps of bone sit before her like tiny offerings. A merchant leans forward anxiously as she rolls her beads and mutters under her breath, interpreting signs only she understands. "The journey will face storms," she whispers. "But your goods will arrive if you pay respects at the shrine of the crossroads." Historians still debate whether these fortune tellers truly believed their own divinations or offered soothing reassurance to anxious travelers. Either way, no merchant setting out into the mountains ever seemed to mind a little extra blessing just in case. In yet another corner, a puppet show draws a circle of children, their eyes wide, as silk-draped figures dance and bicker from behind a simple screen. The tale today involves a bumbling guard who accidentally lets a priceless spice shipment escape his watch. The children squeal with delight as the puppets squawk and spin wildly. You spot a poet for hire standing nearby, reciting verses for anyone willing to pay. His voice floats smoothly. Beneath these stars, beneath this trade, fortune turns like camels swayed. Coins may clink and bargains fly, but stories live when traders die. Coins clink into his cup as a few merchants grin at his quiet jab at their own temporary fortunes. Historians still argue whether traveling poets carried shared oral traditions or composed entirely new verses tailored for each city's gossip. Likely both. And these performances preserve countless fragments of Silk Road life that no tax record or trade manifest could ever capture. The entertainers also serve another subtle role: spies and informants. With ears always open and tongues loosened by wine or laughter, they often overhear secrets whispered carelessly by travelers distracted by the show. A passing merchant whispers to you. The puppet masters always hear the best rumors. You're inclined to believe him. Even as dusk arrives, the performers continue. Lanterns flicker to life, casting warm pools of light across carpets and cushions. The air thickens with incense smoke and roasting meat, while musicians strike up faster, more rhythmic tunes for weary merchants seeking one last thrill before sleep. You sit under a lantern as a dancer enters the circle, swirling ribbons that catch and reflect the flame. The silks flash like molten gold. Around you, men and women lean closer, sipping tea or fermented mare's milk, their weariness momentarily forgotten. The markets thrive not just on trade, but on human connection. And these entertainers, these unsung performers of the silk routes, serve as the nightly pulse, keeping hearts light and travelers grounded, even while fortunes rise and fall with the desert winds. Tomorrow, you'll trade laughter for something more serious. You'll step into the corner stalls where healers, shamans, and medical traders offer remedies to the sick and the superstitious, mixing science, faith, and sheer survival. The morning air is sharper as you step away from last night's laughter and into a very different corner of the market. The healers, shamans, and medical traders whose stalls hum with quiet urgency. This is where travelers turn when the body gives way to the strain of desert miles, mountain passes, and endless bargaining. You follow a faint smell of bitter herbs and drying roots through narrow lanes barely wide enough for two people to pass. The stalls here aren't loud. There's no musical clatter, no puppet shows or juggling. Instead, soft voices murmur questions, prices, and prayers beneath canopies strung with drying plants. Historians still argue whether these healers were trained professionals with formal apprenticeships or simply wise folk whose remedies passed down orally for generations. What's clear is that they draw knowledge from everywhere. Greek, Persian, Indian, Chinese, and deeply local traditions blending into strange hybrids of medicine and magic. At the first stall, a physician dressed in simple robes stirs a bronze mortar, grinding together dried licorice root, frankincense resin, and powdered ginger. The mixture, he explains, eases breathing for travelers wheezing from high-altitude mountain crossings. Beside him, bundles of willow bark, nature's aspirin, are stacked neatly ready for those suffering joint pains from days in the saddle. One merchant leans in, pressing his fingers against swollen knuckles, while the healer nods knowingly, scooping out a fine powder into a paper pouch. Next, you see small tables covered with glass vials filled with camphor oil used to cool fevers, and tiny clay jars containing thick, honey-based salves, nature's antiseptics, ready to cover infected wounds or cracked skin split by dry winds. You overhear whispered advice from one healer. For the eyes, saffron and goat milk. For the stomach, pomegranate bark. For the mind, well, for the mind we pray. Some remedies are comfortingly familiar. Others veer into the surreal. A shaman nearby prepares a mixture of ground pearls and dried snakeskin said to strengthen one's vitality on long journeys. The merchant purchasing it doesn't look entirely convinced, but superstition often travels faster than evidence. Historians still debate whether many of these treatments were effective, or simply placebos delivered with enough confidence to soothe anxious travelers. But when you're 2 months from the nearest royal physician, even questionable hope carries real value. One stall offers tiny silk-wrapped bundles of dried scorpions sold as talismans to ward off venomous bites. Another displays thin slivers of dried shark cartilage, promised to strengthen the heart and restore vigor. The blend of trade and belief is seamless here. Everything carries a price, a story, and a prayer. You move toward a covered tent, where a bone setter works his hands, expertly manipulating a young trader's dislocated shoulder. There are no screams, just a sharp pop and a relieved exhale. The healer smiles. Better before you cross the mountains again. Further back, a traveling monk sets up a small shrine, offering Buddhist blessings alongside his herbal cures. Incense curls upward as he murmurs protective chants for caravans about to depart. Even for non-believers, an extra blessing rarely hurts. At another stall, you watch a woman carefully mix crushed clove with honey and warm goat milk, a crude but effective remedy for toothaches. Her customer sighs in relief after the first sip, pressing a small coin into her hand with quiet gratitude. You realize how important these stalls are, not just for desperate travelers, but for traders who know that even a minor illness can ruin an entire shipment. A sick camel driver means slowed progress. An infected wound means death. And every hour lost can cost a fortune in spoiled spices or missed markets. One physician gestures toward his growing line of clients. Merchants think sickness waits until trade is finished. But sickness is its own trader. It strikes whenever it pleases. You pause before a stall where jars of opium paste sit beside gentler sleeping herbs like chamomile and valerian root. Opium already flowing through these roots for profit doubles here as medicine, dulling pain, calming nerves, and sometimes masking symptoms better left fully treated. Historians still argue whether opium was viewed as dangerous here or simply another tool in the healer's kit. Like everything along these forgotten markets, its use depends on who holds it and how much they understand its risks. The healers aren't just treating bodies. They're tending anxiety. The unknown deserts ahead, the unpredictable mountains, the bandits hiding beyond sight, all these dangers weigh heavy on travelers. And so the healers offer herbs for courage teas for better sleep, and charms to ward off evil spirits. In one quiet corner, a charm maker strings tiny beads and dried herbs into necklaces said to protect against desert ghosts. His fingers work quickly, his voice low. Salt for the body, amber for the heart, cedar for the spirit. A merchant buys one for each member of his caravan. Whether it works is almost beside the point. The peace of mind is worth the coin. As the sun lowers again, casting deep gold across the medical stalls, you sense a quiet reverence among the traders. These healers and shamans may not wear royal titles, but they carry life and death in their fingertips with every mixture chant and quiet reassurance. Tomorrow, you'll leave the healing stalls and slip into a faster, sharper world, the currency exchangers and money changers, where fortunes rise or collapse with every coin and handshake. The light sharpens as you move deeper into the pulsing veins of the market, toward the heart of every transaction and the currency exchangers and money changers. Here, trade isn't measured in silk salt or saffron, but in clinking metal, slippery calculations and the quiet tension of profit balanced on knife edges. You slip beneath an awning stretched low over a row of rough wooden tables. Behind each sits a money changer, his hands nimble, his eyes sharp, his ledgers dog-eared and cluttered with tiny script that only he seems able to read. Historians still argue whether these exchangers operated independently or under the watchful eyes of local rulers and tax collectors. In truth, many served both private brokers who paid the right bribes to keep their stalls open and their hands busy. You approach one table stacked with small wooden trays where coins sit like tiny kingdoms of mismatched shapes and sizes. Thick silver dirhams from Persia. Delicate copper cash coins punched with square holes from China. Gold solidus stamped with Byzantine emperors' faces. Round bronze coins etched with Arabic script Turkic marks or unfamiliar seals. The money changer watches you like a falcon, smiling only with his eyes. He picks up a coin, flips it between thumb and forefinger, and taps it against a polished stone. The high-pitched ring confirms its metal purity, a test older than most empires along these roads. Beside him, weighted scales dance as small iron bars balance each coin's worth. Here, metal weight matters far more than any emperor's face stamped into its surface. Silver content trumps royal image every time. You watch as a trader approaches with a pouch filled with mixed currencies. The exchange begins not just coin for coin, but negotiation for confidence. The trader leans in. "What's your rate for Eastern cash today?" The money changer doesn't answer immediately. He taps his scale, adjusts a counterweight, and finally offers a number. The trader sighs, knowing it's fair and unmovable. Historians still debate whether these currency exchanges helped unify Silk Road trade or exploited foreign merchants who didn't know local weights. The answer, like most things here, is probably both. Beyond simple swaps, these money changers offer a variety of financial services that feel shockingly modern. Letters of credit allowing merchants to move goods without physically carrying all their wealth. Deposits and loans secured with caravan goods as collateral. Ledger keeping recording debts across cities hundreds of miles apart. One scribe nearby dips a thin reed brush into ink, carefully logging a contract into a ledger sealed with wax. The document will travel with the next caravan, verifying a trader's deposit across kingdoms without ever needing to expose his gold to the risks of bandits or bad luck. You realize suddenly how fragile trust becomes here. Each deal hinges on relationships built not just through money, but through reputation, family ties, and long-standing networks that cross languages and religions. In one corner, a Persian merchant and an Indian spice trader argue over exchange rates, switching languages mid-sentence as they haggle. Finally, the money changer mediates, calculating an agreeable rate. By blending their competing weights into a conversion chart only he fully understands. Behind the tables, locked iron chests hold extra reserves of precious metals, gemstones, and raw bullion. These vaults serve not only as financial storage, but as quiet displays of credibility. The larger the chest, the more merchants trust the man behind the scale. Occasionally, you catch glimpses of forgers and counterfeiters trying their luck. A poorly cast coin, its silver content diluted with lead rings dull under the tap test. The money changer snorts and tosses it aside. Nice try. Next. Historians still argue how widespread counterfeit currency truly was across these routes. But the constant testing and sharp scrutiny suggest that fraud was both common and expected, yet rarely successful for long. Further back, a smaller table handles barter conversions, where not everyone trades in coin. Silk, salt blocks, medicinal herbs, and even livestock may enter the equation, each carefully weighed, measured, and valued into temporary equivalencies. You overhear one camel trader converting 6 cured hides, a sack of peppercorns, and 2 barrels of dates into credit vouchers he'll redeem 3 towns further east. His deal involves 3 separate ledgers and 2 witnesses, a fragile but functioning system that somehow keeps trade alive across impossible distances. As dusk lowers, the chatter softens, but never fully dies. The money changers work long after the performers have packed up, and the food stalls have gone dark. Their flickering oil lamps cast long shadows across ledger pages as late arrivals settle debts or secure funds for tomorrow's journey. One veteran money changer sums it up perfectly as you linger. Goods feed the markets, but coin feeds the routes themselves. Without us, trade dries up faster than a desert spring, and you believe him. Tomorrow, you'll leave the clinking of coins behind and step into a subtler fabric of deception and skill, how silk itself was mimicked, faked, and imitated by clever weavers who learned how to profit from the West's hunger for shimmering luxury. The sun glimmers through woven cloth canopies as you move away from the tables of coins and slip into yet another layer of these forgotten markets, the world of silk's many disguises and imitators. Because where demand rises high enough, so does clever imitation. And nowhere along the silk routes was that more true than right here in Central Asia's lesser-known weaving workshops. You step into a cramped courtyard filled with looms, their wooden frames creaking under the rhythmic pull of expert hands. Threads flash in and out, crossing each other like dancers in a complicated ritual that only the weavers fully understand. Historians still argue whether these Central Asian weavers learned their craft directly from Chinese silk masters or developed independent weaving styles that simply mimicked silk's sheen. But standing here, you can see and almost feel how fine the line is between truth and imitation. You pause beside one loom where polished cotton thread rubbed with egg whites and carefully burnished with smooth stones shimmers softly in the light. The result, fabric that glows like silk, breathes like silk, but costs a fraction of what genuine Chinese silk commands. One weaver grins at your raised eyebrow. For some buyers, this is better than silk. Easier to clean, harder to tear, lighter to carry. And from across a banquet hall, no one knows. Indeed, many traders crossing these routes cared more about profit than purity. Genuine Chinese silk was precious, highly regulated, and taxed heavily by every kingdom it passed through. The imitations offered by these workshops filled a vital gap for merchants eager to meet Western demand without bleeding silver at every checkpoint. You move toward another weaver, working with spun flax and fine wool blends carefully dyed with indigo and saffron to mimic the vibrant colors of imperial silk robes. The fabric rolls out smooth and buttery soft, its fibers so fine that they almost hum beneath your fingers. Persian nobles wear my cloth thinking it's from Chang'an. The weaver chuckles. And if they knew, they'd still wear it. Historians still debate whether these workshops operated openly or in secret, given the occasional harsh penalties for counterfeit goods in certain empires. Yet, imitation silk continued to flourish, feeding cities far removed from the original Chinese silkworm farms. You watch as assistants handle the fragile silk blend warps, delicate threads, imported in small amounts from genuine sources, carefully combined with local materials to create convincing hybrids. This middle ground lets merchants claim partial authenticity while maximizing their profits. Further back, you stumble into a smaller workshop, where block printing transforms plain cloth into works of art. Wooden stamps dipped in plant dyes leave repeating patterns of lotus flowers, cranes, and swirling clouds, designs that mimic Chinese, Persian, and even Indian textile traditions, depending on the buyer's tastes. Pattern is everything. One printer says, pressing another stamp into place. Even if the cloth is local, the eyes see China. In the corner, you spy bundles of wild silk cocoons harvested from native Central Asian moths, smaller, harder to spin, but still capable of producing short fibers that can be blended into broader fabric lines. The weavers experiment, constantly balancing material shortages with a never-ending hunger for exotic texture. Even as you watch a small group of merchants inspects a fresh roll, running their fingers across its smooth surface while debating its value. Is it real silk? Partial silk? A masterful fake? In many cases, even the buyers can't quite tell or don't care as long as they can sell it further west at full price. One broker leans towards you with a conspiratorial grin. The Romans never saw a silkworm, only the shine. And shine can be made many ways. You step briefly into a side room where natural sizing agents, egg white rice starch, and boiled animal glue are prepared in wide clay bowls. Applied during the weaving process, these solutions help stiffen threads, enhance luster, and stabilize the final fabric for long-distance travel. Historians still argue whether the West's legendary obsession with silk led directly to this explosion of creative imitation, or whether economic necessity simply drove weavers to fill impossible orders. Likely it's both. Even official traders sometimes bought these imitations knowingly, eager to pad their shipments with affordable substitutes that could pass as luxury goods far from the original sources. After months of camel travel and countless handling, who would notice? As night falls once again over the market, you reflect on how much these workshops reveal about the silk routes themselves. Not just grand caravans of luxury, but 1,000 small acts of adaptation, compromise, and entrepreneurial genius that kept trade flowing no matter the obstacles. Tomorrow, you'll leave the looms behind and step into yet another overlooked layer of these forgotten markets, the religious shrines tucked into market corners where faith quietly travels alongside silk spices and silver. The next morning drapes a soft gold over the market. But today you're not following trade or textiles. Instead, you drift toward the quiet corners, where even the busiest merchants pause, the hidden shrines nestled within these marketplaces, where faith travels alongside camels, spices, and coins. While the silk routes are often remembered for commerce, the roads carried something far more enduring: beliefs. And here in these forgotten Central Asian markets, the borders between commerce and worship blur like smoke rising from incense burners. You slip into a shaded alcove where a small Buddhist shrine stands, its simple wooden frame draped with prayer flags fluttering gently in the morning breeze. A traveling monk kneels before a painted scroll of the Buddha, offering a few coins and a handful of dried fruit. Historians still argue whether these shrines were permanent fixtures or erected temporarily by passing travelers. Likely many were both modest sanctuaries assembled wherever weary merchants needed reassurance beneath unfamiliar skies. Near the shrine, a Persian trader lights a stick of sandalwood incense, his whispered chant blending Sanskrit, Sogdian, and fragments of prayers picked up over countless miles. Around him, other merchants bow their heads briefly before returning to their ledgers. Faith here is woven into routine like thread into cloth. You turn down another alley, where a Nestorian Christian chapel hides behind unmarked doors. Inside, oil lamps cast flickering light onto simple wooden crosses, while robed priests offer quiet blessings to a small group of Silk Road travelers. One merchant crosses himself before stepping outside, his face calm. A little prayer travels better than any camel, he murmurs with a smile. Historians still debate how extensive Nestorian communities truly were along these routes. But archaeological finds of crosses, manuscripts, and gravestones suggest they reached far deeper into Central Asia than many once believed. A few streets away, you find a Zoroastrian fire altar, tended by a solitary priest who fans the sacred flame with practiced grace. Behind him, polished bronze plaques depict Ahura Mazda, locked in eternal struggle against chaos. A Sogdian merchant approaches, offering a sprig of myrtle before whispering his private request for safe passage. Here in these trade hubs, no single faith dominates for long. Instead, beliefs overlap like patchwork quilts, each merchant carrying the comfort of their gods alongside their wares. Further still, you come upon a tiny Muslim prayer corner, no larger than a merchant's stall, where woven mats face toward Mecca. As the call to prayer echoes softly across the market, a handful of traders pause to kneel between piles of textiles and spice sacks. One merchant straightens afterward, brushing dust from his robes. We pray. Then we count. His words carry both reverence and weary humor, the perfect philosophy for life on these roads. Historians still argue whether such interfaith proximity was marked by true tolerance or simply mutual necessity. But in these markets, survival often demands a certain flexibility. A deal struck in the morning might be blessed by one god and delivered that evening under the watchful eye of another. You pass a row of small shrines carved directly into the walls, tiny household altars devoted to protective spirits, local ancestors, or caravan patron deities whose names shift from oasis to oasis. Salt offerings, burned herbs, and clay figurines stand quietly before these niches tended by shopkeepers between customers. In one courtyard, a fortune-telling priestess offers sand divinations. She traces symbols into the dirt with a smooth bone rod, interpreting patterns that travelers believe predict safe passage or warn of bandits. Her customers don't question her calm certainty. They hand over coins willingly for any edge against the unknown. Even the architecture whispers devotion. You notice how many merchant homes are built around private courtyards, with prayer niches so small they vanish unless you're searching for them. Candles flicker there at dawn and dusk as traders seek protection before facing the road's many gambles. Faith here isn't loud. It's woven into the rhythm of commerce, a quiet undercurrent offering stability in a world ruled by sandstorms, border changes, and fragile alliances. You hear a passing proverb shared between two traders. Gold weighs heavy, prayers weigh nothing, yet we carry both. As dusk falls once more, you watch merchants lighting tiny oil lamps outside their stalls, offering brief, whispered thanks for another day survived, another deal, made another stretch of safe passage behind them. Tomorrow, you'll step even deeper into this delicate dance, into the world of spies, political whispers, and dangerous gossip, where information flows through these markets as easily as silk and spices. The market wakes to its usual symphony coins, clinking spices, shifting camels, groaning. But today you listen beneath the noise, because here you've entered the realm of dangerous gossip spies and political whispers that pulse quietly through every corner of these forgotten markets. Trade routes don't just carry goods, they carry secrets. And in Central Asia, where empires border each other like nervous neighbors, information becomes as valuable and as deadly as any shipment of silk or saffron. You step into a small tea stall tucked behind stacks of woven baskets. The old man behind the counter pours cups with steady hands, while his eyes drift constantly across the room, scanning faces, weighing conversations. His customers aren't here just for tea. Historians still argue whether such traders functioned as informal intelligence networks or simply stumbled into espionage through casual chatter. But anyone here long enough knows that every whispered rumor can ripple far beyond these streets. At the far table, two merchants speak softly over steaming bowls of fermented mare's milk, leaning close enough that their words barely rise above breath. The Khan's nephew grows too bold. Troop movements near the Western Pass. The Persian envoy offers new silver weights. Each sentence might mean nothing, or everything. It depends entirely on who's listening. Nearby, a young scribe sits hunched over scrolls, not filled with trade ledgers, but coded letters, reports destined for rulers hundreds of miles away, carefully concealed in caravan cargo or disguised as merchant orders. You watch as one such scroll is carefully wrapped inside a hollow reed flute sealed with wax and handed off to a passing caravan leader who accepts it with a casual nod. The flute's song may never be played, but its message may shape wars. Historians still debate whether many traders were paid informants or simply leveraged their unique access to sell information when convenient. But standing here, you see how deeply entangled trade and politics become when borders shift like desert dunes. One grizzled merchant whispers to you, voice lowered, "The best traders sell goods, the richest sell words. The wisest sell nothing and listen." You turn toward another alley where envoys in disguise meet quietly. A Persian merchant posing as a spice buyer negotiates with a Turkic intermediary who carries messages wrapped inside spice pouches. It's not entirely clear who they serve, perhaps more than one master. A few paces away, you pass a tailor's shop where no garments seem to be ready for sale. Inside, men sip tea while casually swapping border toll rates, local troop strengths, and rumors of shifting alliances between distant courts. The tailor himself seems uninterested in measuring anyone. You hear fragments of riskier talk, a new tax levied near Khotan, the emperor's cousin dead accident or poison. A caravan master switches loyalty at the mountain border. Even caravan routes themselves become political chess pieces. Toll gates open or close depending on which warlord holds favor, which governor has fallen, or which distant court whispers louder into the ears of local rulers. You overhear one tense exchange between two envoys. The Kashgar gate remains closed. For now, the new Khan negotiates. Silver will open it. Not all information travels by human messenger. You glimpse a trained pigeon handler feeding his birds while attaching tiny silk packets to their legs. A bird that can fly over enemy territory may carry more weight than an entire caravan if its message arrives safely. Historians still debate whether these espionage webs were loosely connected freelance networks or deeply organized systems sponsored by empires like the Tang Abbasids or Mongols. Likely both layers operated simultaneously, a double game of shifting loyalties and personal survival. In one darker corner, you watch a small group of mercenaries quietly discussing which caravan lords can be trusted and which ones might disappear quietly on remote desert stretches. Banditry and espionage often rub shoulders here, each feeding off the other's careful knowledge of routes, guards, and bribes. Occasionally, a slip of careless gossip turns fatal. You pass a somber gathering as two men quietly mourn a merchant recently found missing after rumors he sold information to a rival Khan. The lesson hangs heavy in the air. Words may weigh nothing, but they can bury a man quickly. And yet the whispers never stop. Secrets move faster than camels. Even legitimate caravans serve as unwitting couriers. One merchant explains with a shrug, "No one searches silk bundles too closely. Inside silk, one may hide letters. Inside letters, one may hide kingdoms." As night falls again, you stand beneath flickering lanterns, listening to low voices drift through the air like invisible threads. The market never fully sleeps, but its loudest stories are often the safest ones. The real trade happens in murmurs after dark. Tomorrow you'll step out of these whispering alleys and into the brief explosions of color and noise found at the seasonal trade fairs where rare goods and distant peoples converge in chaotic bursts of fortune-seeking frenzy. The desert air feels electric as you step into the open plain where the entire world seems to have gathered the seasonal fairs and temporary market booms that briefly transform dusty crossroads into vibrant cities of tents, flags, and human energy. Here, trade doesn't trickle along in steady daily rhythms. It surges. For a few precious weeks, these fairs pull together merchants, entertainers, pilgrims, and diplomats from across thousands of miles like magnets snapping iron filings into impossible patterns. Historians still argue whether these trade fairs were formally organized by rulers or simply evolved naturally as travelers timed their routes for safety and weather. Either way, you see the result, a pop-up city swirling with sound, scent, and opportunity. You step between rows of brilliantly dyed tents snapping in the wind. Persian carpets unroll directly onto the sand, towering Turkic felt yurts and humble bamboo stalls from distant Chinese traders. The air is thick with dust and perfume sweat and roasted meat incense and camel dung. Laughter bubbles from groups of merchants loudly advertising their wares. Everywhere you turn is something exotic, rare, or completely bizarre. A cage filled with peacocks and parrots destined for distant palaces. Traders unrolling bolts of Khotanese silk, the patterns shimmering like liquid in the sun. Persian glasswork catching the light like fragile colored stars. An Indian merchant with baskets of ivory combs and polished sandalwood boxes. One man waves you closer, offering a tiny vial of ambergris oil said to cure nearly anything. He leans in with a conspiratorial grin. Whale spit or gift of heaven, either way worth every coin. You watch as deal-makers perform their delicate dance. Bargains erupt, collapse, and reform within minutes. Coins clink, hands slap shoulders in agreement. and scribes scramble to keep ledgers from falling hopelessly behind. In a corner, a currency broker maintains a chaotic but steady table of coins from every empire represented. His scales barely stop moving as traders exchange silver for gold for silk credits for grain promises. The economy here runs like a living organism, breathing in goods and exhaling deals. Historians still debate whether these fairs represented true equal markets or thinly disguised opportunities for dominant powers to control who profited most. But standing here, it's clear that everyone gambles and everyone hopes they're the lucky one. Beyond commerce, the fairs bloom with cultural exchanges impossible to orchestrate elsewhere. Musicians from multiple kingdoms perform together their lutes, flutes, and drums, blending rhythms from opposite ends of the continent. Dancers twirl to songs they only half understand, their movements flowing like rivers meeting at the delta. You pause at one gathering where poets trade verses across languages, composing impromptu riddles that blend Persian with Chinese wisdom and Sogdian humor. One silk thread ties 1,000 miles, but who sews the needle through desert and snow? The crowd laughs, tosses coins, and demands more. Here stories are as valuable as any caravan. Further on, religious debates unfold beneath colorful banners. Buddhist monks, Muslim scholars, Nestorian priests, and Zoroastrian magi share shaded corners where theology and philosophy intertwine, sometimes peacefully, sometimes heatedly, but always passionately. You even spot envoys disguised as merchants, their polite trade negotiations masking subtle diplomatic exchanges. Treaties are drafted as quietly as prices are negotiated. Politics disguised beneath piles of wool and jars of honey. In the livestock pens, deals happen on a scale beyond coins. Rows of Bactrian camels, their shaggy coats swaying like hairy ships. Herds of fat-tailed sheep prized for their rich meat and resilient hides. Stalls offering trained falcons, their sharp eyes blinking beneath fine leather hoods. Every living creature here has a price, a use, or both. And when the sun dips, the energy shifts again. Night markets bloom like glowing flowers. Oil lamps swing from ropes, casting flickering gold across silk banners. Perfumed smoke winds between food stalls as tired merchants relax, recounting the day's fortunes or misfortunes over roasted lamb skewers and sweetened tea. One veteran trader laughs at your wide eyes. Saudi Arabia, every coin earned today will be risked tomorrow. That's the rule of the fair. You realize that while these markets swell with optimism, they also throb with uncertainty. A single sandstorm, a bandit raid, or an empire's border shift could erase fortunes overnight. But for now, under the desert moon, they trade like tomorrow will never arrive. Historians still argue whether these fairs were rare peaks or essential arteries of Silk Road life. But here, surrounded by the thunder of voices and the clash of cultures, you sense that these brief bursts of chaotic exchange held the entire web together. Tomorrow, you'll leave the fever pitch behind and confront the final mystery: how politics, shifting empires, and collapsing borders erased these markets from the world's memory, leaving only faint traces beneath the sand. The fair winds down. The banners lower, the fires dim, and the markets begin to dissolve like morning fog as caravans roll away toward distant horizons. You walk slowly now, following these last footprints into the fading legacy of the Silk Route's forgotten markets, how they vanished into history's quieter shadow. The desert seems almost too vast for their memory. And yet for centuries, these markets thrived until they didn't. Historians still argue whether their disappearance was slow erosion or sudden collapse. The truth, like the roots themselves, was likely woven from many threads, unraveling all at once. You pass an abandoned caravanserai, its walls crumbling under the weight of wind and neglect. Once it echoed with camel bells and bargaining voices. Now only sand fills its empty stalls. The first thread, political shifts. Powerful empires rose and fell along these routes. The mighty Tang dynasty weakened, the Abbasid Caliphate fragmented, and Mongol unity cracked apart. With each fallen ruler, safe passage grew riskier, taxes ballooned, and border controls grew unpredictable. Merchants, once confident in their multi-year circuits, began choosing shorter, safer routes or staying home altogether. The grand caravans shrank. The second thread, new sea routes. As maritime technology advanced, European, Arab, and Chinese ships began bypassing deserts altogether. What took months by camel now took weeks by boat with fewer middlemen and far less risk. One sailor you overhear boasts from a coastal port town. The sea swallows no camels, and pirates are cheaper than toll collectors. The third thread, local violence. With empire protections weakening, banditry blossomed. Raiders targeted the smaller, isolated markets, first attacking weakened caravans, seizing goods, or demanding impossible tribute from frightened traders. Some once thriving oases simply withered into ghost towns. In one abandoned alley, you see traces of those days, broken pottery, scattered bronze coins, and a single shattered loom now silent beneath layers of sand. The fourth thread, disease. Plague waves possibly carried along the very trade routes that once connected kingdoms, devastated cities, and shrank populations. Fewer merchants, fewer customers, fewer reasons to risk the road. Whispers spread like sickness itself. The roads are cursed. The gods turn their backs. Even successful cities shrank inward, focusing on local survival rather than far-flung trade dreams. The smaller markets you've explored, those vibrant back streets and hidden stalls, were the first casualties. And yet, some traders adapted. Silk still moved. Spices still flowed. But the network, once knitted by these crossroads, loosened, fragmenting into smaller, disconnected circuits. The humming web of old grew quiet. What remains today are whispers, scattered ruins, forgotten names and artifacts, half buried beneath sand dunes. Stray coins minted in long-fallen cities, silk fragments still gleaming faintly in ancient tombs, weaving tools unearthed from collapsed workshops, faded prayer flags clinging to remote shrines. Archaeologists brush away centuries of sand, piecing together fragments of once booming trade hubs that the grand histories barely mention. You realize now why these markets remain so forgotten, and they existed not for kings or emperors, but for the ordinary, 1,000 humble exchanges repeated endlessly until the desert finally swallowed them. One old trader, perhaps the last echo of those days, offers you a proverb as you part. The great rivers are remembered, but without the streams, no river flows. The silk routes were not one road, but countless streams. Like these markets you've walked through, fragile, adaptable, human. And though they've faded, their fingerprints remain. In the languages we still borrow words from, in the foods we still eat, in the silk spices and stories that cross borders even now. The market may be gone, but its heartbeat lingers. The night finally presses in, wrapping the desert in cool velvet. The fires burn low, the last merchants drift into slumber, and the wind carries away the final whispers of the day's trade. You close your eyes, hearing the soft creak of long-forgotten looms, the gentle clink of coins that once danced across wooden tables, the muted laughter of storytellers spinning silk-threaded tales beneath starlit skies. The silk routes' forgotten markets may no longer glow beneath the moon, but in your mind's quiet spaces, they breathe again, alive, with color scent and voices rising from dusted crossroads. You picture the hidden shrines still tucked into broken courtyards, the careful hands folding imitation silk, with quiet pride the cautious eyes of money changers weighing silver against trust. And beneath it all, the same pulse hums that once carried caravans across empires, the longing to trade, to connect, to survive, to turn risk into fortune and fortune into stories told beside the fire. Now the sand settles once more. The camels sleep. The banners fall still. And so too may your breath slow. Your mind grows soft. The market dims. Let sleep carry you gently now across quiet dunes and starlit roads into dreams spun from threads of silk spice and story. Sweet dreams.